Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Schneerson of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Welcome back to this special series that we are doing on prayer in honor of Elul, based on the Kuntres Hatefilla, the Tractate of Prayer by the Rebbe Rashab. And today's topic is going to be da'as, the exploration of this attribute known as da'as, or the more Israeli or Sephardi accent, da'at. Commonly translated to mean knowledge, but really we'll see when we say knowledge, when we say das, we mean something very, very, very specific. So before we get into the text and everything, I thought that it might be interesting to bring up a really concrete example, a really intense example perhaps, of what is meant by das and when we say knowledge and what this means. So, in this year that I am recording this episode, we're almost a full year after the horrendous, horrible, atrocious October 7th massacre that occurred in Israel, perpetuated by the Hamas terrorists against innocent Israelis and even non-Israelis as well. Those of you listening are most likely quite familiar with what happened that day. And interestingly enough, this event, this October 7th massacre, was widespread in the news throughout the world. But yet we find that Jews in particular around the world were much more affected by this, even if they weren't personally there, even if they didn't have any immediate family members who were, hurt, God forbid, in October 7th. But yet we find that Jews, on average, are a lot more emotional about October 7th than other people, right? So why is this? We're all reading the same newspapers, more or less. They've had exhibits like Nova exhibits and stuff like that. And yet we find, and I see that Jewish people are really frustrated at the world in the sense that, that we see that the world does not seem to be on our side. They're not feeling the same outrage, the same hurt that we do. Obviously, there are exceptions. We're very grateful for those exceptions, for those righteous amongst the nations who are standing up and who were really affected by this. But by and large, it really is Jewish people who are feeling the outrage, who are feeling the hurt. Even now, almost a year later, in fact, probably more so now than a year ago in a lot of ways. So why is this? This might sound like a really obvious question. It might be like, well, of course, Jews are feeling this, but why? Like, if we really wanted to break it down, why is it that Jewish people were more affected by and large on a global scale emotionally by October 7th than other people? So the answer is simple, right? It's because it's personal to us. Because even if we weren't physically there, even if we don't have an immediate relative who were there or a very, very close friend who was there, we know the Jewish nation is so small that it's like, it's only just like a few degrees of separation away between us and who the people were there. And even if it's not like, oh, my second cousin's brother had a friend who was at the Nova Festival or something like that, even if it's not getting into all of that, there's a certain sense of family that all Jewish people have. And there's also a certain sense of the implications of what this attack meant and means globally at large, for Jews at large, in terms of anti-Semitism and how the world views us, and seeing the response of the world, or, in many cases, the lack of response to the world, or the negative response of the world to this attack. And so the reason why Jews feel the way that they do about October 7th in a way that maybe a lot of other people can't relate to is because of this attribute of da'as, which we're going to be exploring in today's episode. It's because it's personal to them. So it's an emotional feeling for sure, but it's actually based on intellect. It's based on the mind. So this faculty of das, which we began speaking about in the previous episode, is a very interesting faculty because it is an intellectual faculty. It's in the triad of the intellectual faculties. We have Chochma, Bina, and Das, which spells Chabad, which is the acronym, and it's where the name of the Chabad movement comes from, because it is an intellectually based movement. It's all about, the whole movement of Chabad Hasidus is about using your mind and your intellect as a vehicle to serve God. So das is one of those intellectual traits. But yet, as we started talking about yesterday, it also has something emotional about it. It serves as a connecting force between the mind and the emotions, and it's what allows the heart to have the emotions of the mind seep into it and eventually become revealed. So this is what we're going to be discussing today, and with the ultimate goal, to keep it all in context again, of learning how to apply this to our prayer and to our service of God. Because again, this is the tractate on prayer, and as we've mentioned several times in these episodes, the whole point of praying should be, anyways, in order to connect us to God in a deep and profound way, in a way where there really is no separation between us and Him, and ultimately with the result of having us come to a state of refining and transforming ourselves, transforming our character traits to become more godly. And the way that we do this is by changing our prayer experience into a more meditative kind of experience, which is going to be something that is felt in a very visceral and emotive way within ourselves. And as we've been discussing, this experience that we're seeking, that we're yearning for, actually begins in the mind. It doesn't begin in the heart. It's not about like hyping ourselves up to try to get ourselves to feel something, but it's actually more about using our intellect to meditate, which we started speaking about yesterday, how we do that, and think about godly ideas in a very, deep and focused way, spending a lot of time, not just like learning something about something in a cursory way, but actually spending a lot of time learning about something. And through doing that, that will allow us to tap into the essence of the idea that we're learning. And that essence is very much connected to the attribute of das, which is going to be, again, that connecting force that's going to allow us to have those intellectual ideas seep into our hearts. And now in today's episode, we're going to really talk about this attribute of das, and we're going to talk about specifically, contrasting people who know something on an intellectual level without das versus other people who know the exact same thing on an intellectual level, but they have das, and how that will look like, how that will manifest for the two different people. Where you can have two people go to the same lecture, have the same IQ, let's say, take the same notes, have the same, level of memory and all that stuff. They both get 100% on the quiz that they're given the next day about the material. But yet one of them leaves that experience deeply changed and the other person doesn't, because one of them internalized the material and the other one didn't. So we're going to see how the Rebbe Rashab explains all of this. And for context, this is chapter 5 today of Kuntres Hatefilla. And so the Rebbe Rashab begins, and he says that it's known that das is this idea of being connected to the idea and the concept. And it's considered to be like an intermediary in order to birth the midos, as we've been speaking about. However, says the Rebbe Rashab, this is not the whole thing with it. It's not only the idea of becoming connected to the concept, but rather it's its own thing. So it's not just that it's like an intermediary between like other attributes, but rather it is its own brain, he calls it, in the three brains, which are in the brain. So we've mentioned this previously, that within the intellectual attributes, there are three intellectual attributes. There's chokhmah, bina, and dat. So dat is its own attribute within the mind. And he says that the whole idea of it, of what is the substance of this das as in its own right, is the idea of feeling that which is understood. So it's when the concept becomes really felt and there's a greater recognition of what it is. Like as we've been mentioning, it becomes personal now. It's not just like a theoretical idea. It's actually something that somebody feels. And the way that this happens is through connecting, that he connects himself in a strong way to this concept. And through connecting himself in this way, then he comes to really recognize it and feel the essence of the idea. So meaning to say that it goes from being this like intellectual concept that's outside of the person, totally removed from the person, and the person actually establishes some form of connection to this concept and connects with it in a really, really deep way, in a personal way. And now the Rebbe Rashab says here in parentheses, he says that due to this connection and due to what's going on over here, this is actually going to increase the level at which, the amount at which this person understands this thing, both in terms of its details and also in a deeper way. And he'll get closer and closer to this object through this process. And this is what's going to subsequently cause this excitement within the emotions, as we're going to explain. So basically, the more a person really focuses on a concept and tries to connect with it in a real and personal way, then they're going to come to understand it better. They're going to come to understand all of its details better, and they're going to understand the depth of it better, and they're going to get closer to really grasping the true essence of what it's all about. And this is what's going to lead to having not just an intellectual connection with this object, but an emotional connection as well. And now this feeling that we're describing, this is the idea of das. This is what das is all about. Because by contrast, as we mentioned in the beginning of today's episode, you could have a person who understands something perfectly, but doesn't feel it at all. Like they know it theoretically on an intellectual level. They could be quizzed about it. They could, they could give a whole lecture about it, but it's not something that's felt within them. Like, for example, he says like a child, a very, very smart child that understands everything, but he doesn't feel the essence of the idea. So like what this brings to mind for me is like, if you think about like, sometimes you see these like child prodigies who are really good at answering, they win all kinds of awards, and they hold so much knowledge inside of their minds, and it's really incredible. But just because they know all of these things intellectually, like they don't have the life experience necessary to actually like do something with them for the most part. Because they're not necessarily going to feel the gravity of the implication of the knowledge that they know, even if they know a lot, even if, they know things on like the level of like a PhD or something like that. And the Rebbe Rashab goes on and he says, this is specifically why there's actually an idea that a child who's less than 13 years old, who's younger than 13 years old, is not liable for punishment. Because even if he's really, really smart and very sharp, and he has a really strong grasp of all of the mitzvahs, all of the laws of the mitzvahs, the positive commandments, the prohibitions, in really true way. He's still not going to be liable for punishment because he doesn't have das. So meaning to say he doesn't actually have a recognition and a feeling about what mitzvahs truly mean. And in brackets now, the Rebbe Rashab that this is similar to the idea that when a person makes a vow, or a person commits to getting married, they have to know who they're making a vow towards or who they're getting married to. Like, like these things can only take effect. It's not just like, like a signed document. There needs to be like a personal recognition of who a person is committing to in this way. And going back to a child, like same way, like when it comes to mitzvahs, that they don't really know what they mean, even if they might technically know all of the mitzvahs. So too, when we talk about money, and the greatness of money, like if a child is too young, they most likely never worked, they never saved money. They never tried to get a house or, anything like that. So they don't have a real appreciation of the value of money the way that an adult does, even if they know the technical intricacies of money. It's not going to be something that they appreciate in the same way. And this is true also not in terms of having money, but also not having money. Like somebody who's the idea of poverty isn't something that that children really understand in the same way that an adult does. Like there are so many stories of people who even like grew up homeless, or I know somebody who grew up on a trailer park actually. And I asked this person, I said, growing up on a trailer park, did you realize that you were poor? And he said, no, not really. Like he said that he always had, his mother always made sure that they had food to eat and, clothes to wear and everything. So children don't necessarily understand poverty, nor do they understand money, the value of money, the way that adults do. Okay, now the Rebbe Rashab is going to bring up a really interesting point, and he's going to say that this is actually the root of cruelty. Because where does cruelty come from? Cruelty comes from the lack of feeling. There's a lack of empathy, where the person doesn't feel empathetic towards the other, doesn't feel the pain of the other person, and thus they don't feel compassionate towards them. A compassionate person is somebody who is empathetic, who feels the pain of the other person, and this is why he feels compassion towards this person. And now we can understand why. This is like a side point in Chassidus that's really interesting, that the attribute of compassion, rachamim in Hebrew, comes from da'as, and that's why they're on the same line. So in the spheros, in the attributes, the way that they're laid out, there are some attributes that are on the right, there are some that are on the left, and then there's some that are in the middle. And so da'as is in the middle. It's the third attribute of the intellectual attributes. And then the attribute of rachamim, which is related to tiferet, is the third emotive attribute. So, and it's on that same line as das. And now we can understand why, because being compassionate relates to having das. If a person is lacking in compassion, it means that they're lacking in empathy, which means that they're lacking in this deeper emotional recognition of the other person. And so with all of this, we can understand how das is all about the idea of feeling. And the Rebbe Rashab here says that this is like in the case of Eov, in the story of Job, there was a certain point when Eov said things that were inappropriate and that he shouldn't have said. And the scripture lets us know that lo b'da'at yedaber, that he didn't speak with das, meaning to say that he didn't feel the truth of what he was saying. And if he would have, implying that if he would have actually felt what he was saying, he wouldn't have said this thing. So das is really all about feeling. It's about feeling the concept through connecting one's mind to this idea. So now the interesting thing about this thing, we keep saying that das is feeling. Like usually we think of feeling as being like a heart thing, about emotions and all of that. But here in this case, we're actually talking about the feeling in the mind, in the brain. And the Rebbe Rashab says here that actually the physical gidim, often translated as veins or sinews of feeling, are found in the brain. So, I'm understanding this as like the nerves, like the actual nerve center is in the brain. So even though we say, we feel things in our heart, really the only way that we're able to feel these things is because that feeling is really originating in the brain. So it might sound funny at first glance that we're saying, this idea of das, which is an intellectual attribute, is all about feeling, and the definition of it is feeling when it's found in the brain. But in fact, it is the case, because actually the origin of feeling is in the brain. And even though it is in the brain, and even though that's really where das is found, it does afterwards actually come to the heart. That the heart now feels this idea, which is in the person's mind, and the heart gets excited in accordance with the understanding. So we're trying to understand all of this in terms of our connection with God, and developing an emotional connection to godly ideas. But we can see this actually with physical things too, that for example, when it comes to money, when a person, feels the value of money, this feeling is in their heart, and their heart gets excited. It's not just like an intellectual excitement about money. It's something that people actually feel in an emotional way in their heart. In a sense that we can say that there's like a love and wanting to go after money. Like I relate to this personally, when I try to hype myself up to do sales calls for my business, because it's not something I like doing like most other people. all. But, when I tell myself like, hey, if I make more sales calls, I'm going to make a vessel to get more money, and money is good. I like money, that kind of hypes me up and it gets me excited to do those sales calls. So to like run after the money, so to speak, even though, of course, we know that money really ultimately comes from Hashem, but we do need to do our part and make a keli for it to some extent. And so too, in the opposite way, when a person really feels the lacking and like the idea and understands the idea of like poverty, then the person does not want this at all. It's on an emotional way. It's not just intellectually they don't want it. They really don't want it. And so now we can apply all of these ideas to serving God. So just like a child, who doesn't necessarily understand the value of money, isn't going to get as excited about making those sales calls, about, running after money and getting a high paying job, because they don't really understand the value of that money. So too, when it comes to godly ideas, the way that a person can really come to this level of service, of this avoda that we're looking to get, is through coming to feel the essence of this godly idea. When a person feels the essence of this godly idea, then the feeling's going to come into his heart as well automatically. And he's going to get excited in his heart about godliness. So just like, when if a person, let's say, gives you let's say somebody pitches a business to you and wants you to become a founder in the business. And at first it's like really theoretical, but then the more they explain it to you, you start to see how practical it is and how it's something that you could really do and how you could really make a lot of money from it. So even though it's all still an intellectual process, you guys are just like in the planning stage and understanding it all, you're going to start to feel excited in your body and in your heart, right? So similarly here too, when a person really comes to value and appreciate the value of godliness, then this is going to become not just like a intellectual experience, but it's actually going to become a very emotional heart experience as well. And now this emotional experience, this excitement can manifest in different ways. So for example, there can be a type of meditation upon godliness that's going to lead a person to want to be close to God. And this is going to lead a person to have this feeling of ratzo, of like running towards, to get close to God and to cleave to God. And this type of meditation about getting close to God in this way, the Rebbe Rashab describes as actually leading to a more external type of superficial type of love of God that comes about through this type of meditation. And a more internal type of love actually comes from a different type of meditation, which is where a person meditates upon the greatness of God and the wondrous greatness of God and how God is cannot be understood because he's so great. Or also meditating upon the idea that nothing exists without God and how everything is considered as if not and nothing in comparison to God. And this comes about through meditating upon the fact that the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God, is found here, down here, just like it is found up above. And this type of meditation actually leads to a feeling of awe or fear. So we see that there are different types of meditations that can produce different types of feelings. And the Rebbe Rashab says that, all of these are written about elsewhere. All the details of the specifics of these meditations are written about in different places. But now the thing to recognize with all of this is that the feeling in the heart and this excitement in the heart come about on their own without trying. So it's not like a person needs to like rile themselves up and work themselves up to feel this godly idea in their heart and get all excited and develop this great love and fear within their heart. But rather it's going to come on its own from the mind into the heart. And again, the way that this happens is through this attribute of das, which draws down and first arouses this excitement of the heart for the mind, as we spoke about, and then afterwards it goes from the mind into the heart. And this happens in like an automatic fashion. So it's like really we're working with the mind. We're focusing the main striving, like the main work where the real focus that we need here is in the mind. And if we work properly with the mind, then the heart will follow automatically. So so it's sort of it's a little, it might seem kind of paradoxical in a way because what the Rebbe Rashab is trying to say is that, Yes, the whole point is to feel these feelings in the heart. We want to get to this place that we get excited in our emotions, specifically in a revealed way inside of our heart. And this is truly what the essence of service is, the essence of avoda is. And that this is actually going to create a vitality, like an excitement in our keeping Torah and mitzvahs. And for us to clarify and refine our character traits, our natural character traits, as we spoke about, that's the whole point of praying, and the whole point of avoda, of service of God, is to transform ourselves into more godly beings. And this is related to the very famous verse taken from Devarim, chapter 4, verse 39, where it says, that you should know today and you should return it to your heart. So the main thing here is the heart, is the returning to the heart. This is the main service. But nevertheless, even though, yes, this is the whole point, to have the excitement be revealed in the emotional attributes in the heart, this is all dependent specifically on the mind, on the striving in the brain, meaning to meditate and contemplate at length, specifically through this meditation, this intellectual meditation, to connect oneself really, really well in the essence of this godly idea, which is being understood, to the point that he gets to actually feel it within his brain. And through this is going to cause a greatness and a widening of this concept, to really be able to understand it in all of its details, and also in a deeper way, as we spoke about earlier, to the point that then the light will actually become will actually radiate in a revealed way in his brain. And then from here, the light on its own will be drawn down into his heart, because the heart will now understand. It will now understand the value, the goodness of this godly idea. And he'll become excited in his heart with true love and fear. And this is what's referred to as an essential excitement, where the heart actually feels excited in a true way about this, about the essence of godliness, due to this godly feeling that's felt in his heart. So that's the end of this chapter. And now here's the summary that is given at the end. I actually just found out, by the way, one of our listeners pointed out to me that these summaries were actually written by the Frierdiker Rebbe, not by the Rebbe Rashab himself. So interesting factoid about that. So so the summary for this episode, for today's chapter, is that first of all, we explained that das is a brain in its own right. So yes, das is all about this idea of connection and everything, like we've been speaking about, in the previous episode, and it's a very commonly held idea, is that das has to do with connection. But in addition to this, not only does das have to do with connection and connecting to different things, but it actually is its own thing. It is its own brain. It's one of the three brains that are described, Chochmah, Bina, and Das. And what is this third brain? Like how can we define Das in its own right? It's the idea of actually feeling the concept. And what's described as like the veins of feeling, I'm thinking of this as like neurons, which are connected to the nerves throughout in the heart, are mainly in the brain. And from all of this will cause a true feeling of excitement in the heart. So that's the end of the chapter for today. So just in summary, my kind of takeaway from this is that a lot of times people think that if they want to feel excited about godliness, if they want to get close to God, they kind of have to hype themselves up and build up this feeling, like maybe, I've seen people even try to force themselves to cry or get emotional or something like that. That's not really the path that the Rebbe Rashab is taking here. And the Rebbe Rashab says, don't focus on that. Don't focus so much on your emotions. Focus on the mind. Focus on really trying to understand an idea. And that is going to lead automatically to the feelings. So it's, a similar kind of thing is like, I've sometimes seen this as like, people sometimes go to like a Holocaust museum or something like that. And they're kind of trying to get into a certain mood and feel solemn, especially somebody who's like not Jewish necessarily and doesn't really know that much about it, but they recognize, okay, this is like a very serious experience. There's obviously something very sad here. We know the Holocaust is a very sad thing. So they're trying to get themselves like hyped up to get in that state of mind. People do this on Tisha B'Av sometimes also, that they're like, we're supposed to be sad, so we have to watch movies to get us in a sad mood and everything like that. And we see a similar thing when it comes to being happy. Sometimes people are like, it's their birthday and they're supposed to be happy. So they try to like, hype themselves up to be happy. They start playing really loud music or whatever, start dancing around, fake it till you make it kind of thing. Like, so even that might help to a certain extent, but true joy, true love, true sadness, true whatever it is that we're looking for actually is created through the mind. And this is true with people. This is true with, our lives and in general, that, if a person wants to feel more authentically about whether it comes to the Holocaust or about a loved one, if you really want to develop love, a deeper love and appreciation of a friend or of a spouse, it really requires really taking the time to meditate and use your brain and intellect to connect to the idea or to the person in a more intellectual way, actually, and try to really understand the concept, try to understand the person. And this automatically will lead to the feelings. So too, when it comes to connecting with God and trying to develop our feelings of love and fear of God within our hearts, is actually to paradoxically not focus on the heart, but to focus on the mind and to focus on trying to connect to godly ideas in an intellectual way and build up an appreciation on an intellectual level. And that intellectual appreciation will translate into an intellectual feeling, which we call das, which is this where the concept is not just an abstract theoretical concept anymore, but it's actually something personal and something felt within the mind. And then this will automatically translate into a feeling in the heart, where the person will actually experience really true emotions. So that's the end of the chapter today. And we're going to continue delving into this topic next time. And we're going to talk about a different case where one might actually feel something without putting in so much intellectual work and striving. And what that is all about. So stay tuned for that, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.